Okay, so we'll now go back to item 5 and the recommendations on the board. I'll move, seconded by Councillor Paula. Yep. So we're going into debate. Paula.
Thank you. Just a few comments. Thank you, Lachlan, for your clarity around the process and the fact that this does come back to Council after a lot more negotiation and design in the detail for sign-off is good. And like you say, there's an opportunity for both parties to withdraw their support for the project should significant either financial or other matters come up. I did want to flag, and hence my questioning, and thank you to Chris for giving me confidence that we're part of an integrated catchment management approach for this project, given the sensitive environment of it, which I think is good. So that answered the question I was aiming at before, so I feel very confident about that. I think it is, there are some details that we need to keep an eye on. Some of the, like I say, some of the catchment management, and other councillors have spoken to some transport matters that need careful consideration, but I'm confident that as long as we're still in the process as a governance body and we can come back to that and have the assurances at the right time, that we should let this go ahead. It's quite exciting to consider that we can get large, and with what we're going to hear later in the day as well, a large number of houses built quite speedily, and that seems to be what we need in Hamilton right now, because even with the long-term plan decisions about housing areas that we've got to consider, there's a time delay in that. So we do need to look at good projects, let them stand under their own merits and go forward and get some more houses for Hamilton. And it's people especially looking forward to the government landing on a more useful definition of what housing affordability is. And I am looking forward to understanding in more detail Kiwi Build and how that helps us through this process. And on that note, I'm happy to be the seconder for this. Thank you.
Councillor Mark.
Look, I was speaking a very global and simple sense on this. It's very exciting, and thank you for your work and detail that you're putting into this. I think there's some really good salient learnings we've learned from our existing development, but make no mistake, we're going to have to put our foot down when it comes to this. A special housing area isn't just a release of some rules and you guys go do it. We are going to have to join the party and get moving on this as well. I worry, I don't want to see another Gordonton Road debacle in another 10 years' time. I don't want to see a whole area where kids are travelling miles and miles to school, so it behoves us to really crank into this, have those conversations early on in the piece. There's a lot of work for us to do in an SHA as well. I'm delighted that we've got a partner in the form, or a potential partner in the form of Charles Marr, because he seems to be very obliging and comes with a great track record from what I can see. It's also, to me, the way of the future, where private enterprise comes to us with some jobs almost done, and we become an enabling council rather than an all-over providing council. I can repeat this if you like later on in private time. So I'm really looking forward to running alongside these people rather than playing catch up with them and helping deliver a safe, smooth and happy Hamilton. Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. I'm supportive of the recommendation. I am just a little concerned that, and I totally understand the whole basis behind this is to fast track development. There is a perceived and I think a real housing crisis, and this is one of the ways we can get around a lot of the regulation and the red tape to develop housing. I am just concerned that there are neighbours and things like that which I don't know that they have. And I'm not being critical of anyone, just through, and I say it quote unquote in a pleasant way, ignorance or just lack of knowledge that these things are happening. And I just get concerned that there is likely to be a lot of people out there who are not really aware what's going on. And for example, I know some of the people who've sold to Charles, and they're not really aware of what's going on now. Of course, they're leaving. They're not worried. But so there's a level of lacking of knowledge in our community about potential loss of property rights or loss of amenity, loss, the development happening around that they're not aware of. So I just caution that there will be some parties who won't be aware of what this is happening or won't be aware of potential impacts who will probably come out and tell us about the impacts somewhere along the way. And I'm not too sure if we have a way of mediating that. Having said that, it's very hard to turn your nose up at above 1,000 houses if they do get built and if they do get sold. Thank you.
Councillor Robb.
Thanks, Chair. I'll also be supporting the motion that's on the table. I do, and I think for the reason that we have a developer with a really, really good track record who could bring some fresh ideas to Hamilton that he's been able to, he's been successful in doing elsewhere. I do, though, have concerns over unknown costs and the quantum of those unknown costs, which we've discussed both in PX and in open. And I think that our council staff, and we also need to be quite nimble and careful about making sure that we've got all the costs identified and we've got them in the right silos in terms of how the PDA agreement finally falls, so that there is no surprises for the developer and that there are no surprises for us in terms of what this development could ultimately cost. And I do have that concern that this development appears to me to be out on its own. It's not part of a natural growth path where we're adding another development onto one that's already next door, north or south or east or west. So, so there will be an element of risk there, both for us and for the developer. And so extreme care, in my view, needs to be taken to make sure that all of those costs are known before we do the final sign-off. Thank you.
Councillor Dave.
Thanks. I support this and will vote for the recommendation. I think it helps housing affordability in the sense that it keeps pressure on section prices, keeps them down rather than having too limited a supply like we've had in the recent past, which forces section prices up. So it's a good interference in the market. Just looking at Gary when I say that. I think the fact that it's a good move because it's actually much larger than the very small SHA developments we've got around the place, which literally are being shoehorned into existing areas, and there's some pretty strange looking footprints when you look at some of them, whereas this footprint is actually the sort of footprint we envisaged when we did the structure plan for Rotokauri area, except it happens to be the top end of it rather than down the south end, where we're actually doing putting in some infrastructure at the moment. But there's no, in terms of its final look, that is going to be the sort of final look we envisaged in that area. So I'm quite satisfied that the city will grow to meet it. The problem is, for the 10, 15, 20 years in between, the connections between that area and the rest of the city, which is one of the things that Rob just talked about, we need to have a good close look at that. I also have a great concern about the ability of central government agencies like NZTA and Ministry of Education to A, fast-track things, and two, have enough vision that's more modern and different from the way they've looked at things in the past to actually enable these things to happen easily rather than to put up their own obstacles in the path. And there's enough of our obstacles without adding theirs. So I think our staff need to be working quite closely on that and getting political involvement in that. So it's not just restricted to a sort of a staff technical discussion when we're talking, say, with the Ministry of Education about the need for a school. Thanks.
And I just want to thank staff for the work they've done on this, Blair and Luke. And it's too early to jump for joy. this is just the beginning of a long process, but it would be great to cut the ribbon when the first house opens up and things are actually underway, and we get 40% of it coming through as affordable housing as defined by central government, which we're still waiting for that final documentation. So we'll vote by the hands, all those for, any against, carried. Thank you. We'll now go to page 166, item 6. Thank you, Paul. We'll take the report as read, and is there any further comments?
Thank you, Mayor. I've got the public speakers to the item now, so we've got 1 10-minute session. I don't think we need that from the applicants, and then Mr. Clive Dunn from the Riverlea Group in opposition to the scheme. So if I could invite them to come forward and have their say first, and then I'll present the item.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor and councillors. Thank you for the time, attention this morning. Just by way of introduction, I'm here as representing both the Riverlea Trust, who are owners of 2A Maui Street, Te Rapa, and Riverlea Group Limited, which is a family business who are manufacturers and distributors of the Kiwi and Duratuf Kitset garden sheds, the well-known and locally grown brand of Greens wheelbarrows, which has been around for many years, as well as ranges of imported barbecues, barbecue fuels and outdoor fires. As a group, we support 30 different charitable organisations by way of donations this year in excess of $100,000. May not seem a lot to many of you, but quite significant to us. Organisations include Waikato Community Hospice, Westpac Waikato Air Ambulance, Starship, Ronald McDonald House and educational facilities being examples. As owners, we pay significant rates to the Hamilton City Council. As a manufacturing business, we operate roll formers, presses, saws and other machinery, and currently employ approximately 40 staff. We've grown significantly over recent years and have plans for growing our business by 50% in the next 3 years. This will have an impact on our ability to employ more staff. We acquired this 10,000 square metre property in 2014. This was a decision we made in favour of an equivalent sized property at Northgate Development, Horatu, which of course comes into the Waikato District Council, and which did contain some quite attractive terms for us. We chose to stay more central and always had in mind the possible potential for expansion of our business by way of acquiring more property in the area. We completed construction of a 4,300 square metre factory and office complex in July 2015. To get to our concerns, while our concerns were addressed in submission to the Hamilton City Council by Louise Feathers Planning on the 24th of November last year, we had no response from Council until last Friday, when we were advised of this meeting today. Our initial overriding concern, not our only one, was as to the impact of a residential development in a predominantly industrial and commercial area. Having said this, we do appreciate the need for more housing and compliance with central government policy in this regard. We would ask if, with the proposed state SHA at Gilbers Place and Rotokarri, is this sufficient to meet the need without the need for Eagle Way being developed as an SHA? If the SHA does proceed in this particular case, we'd like to underline our other concerns. What will be the impact on traffic flow, congestion, etc., bearing in mind the extension of Maui Street to Eagle Way, as well as the impact of more traffic movements through residential traffic flows? What will be the health and safety impacts with children perhaps playing in the streets, mothers in pushchairs, bikes, parked cars in a street where on a typical day we have approximately 154 traffic movements per day, cars, courier vans, trucks, including container trucks, B-trains, etc. These volumes will be increasing over coming months, and this does not include our neighbours who have significant traffic movements and need to park on the street due to site parking constraints. Neither does it allow for the extra traffic flows that will inevitably occur by extending Maui Street through to Eagle Way, seen as being a shortcut from the north to Eagle Way and to the base. None of us here today want to be addressing health and safety issues after an accident has occurred. Now's the time to consider this. What is the impact on our current right to have a 24/7 operation, including noise levels? We would be concerned as to the proposal, if it proceeds, allowing for a significant buffer zone between industrial buildings and residential buildings, as pointed out in Louise Feather's submission. It hasn't been allowed for in the initial plans. Practically, a mother trying to settle her newborn child while a manufacturing business is operating next door doesn't quite make sense to us. Given the area is targeted for affordable housing solutions, we have large concern that this area will could deteriorate over time, have an impact on our image and investment. This would cause us to consider whether we are in the best position going forward. I realise this is a business and investment decision that we need to consider. We realise that if the SHA is approved, some of these issues will be addressed at the qualifying development stage. However, we do ask that the Council give these matters serious consideration now, and if, in their wisdom, they grant an approval to proceed further, they keep us fully appraised and involved in all discussions as a seriously affected party. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Hey, could I have staff highlight on the map the relevant pieces of land that were in question here, just so that the councillors can understand the context of that presentation?
So we've got page 180 and 181. That may be helpful.
Can you bring it up on screen, can you, Paul?
Yep. Had that one.
Right way, you mean?
Forget that. We don't know if you're on the PowerPoint.
180 in here.
181.
181, yep.
There we go.
That's us.
To the left of that, to the left of the red box, you might say, just where the proposed, the little. If someone put, yeah, that's it. Yep, that's us there, right beside it. Yeah.
Okay. The councillors aware of that? Councillor's interested in that? Councillor Ryan is. Oh, and Councillor Mark. It's 2 out of 13.
Given that the car park opposite us is Nissan's backyard, we're probably the most closely affected, I guess, really.
There's Nissan's, and then there is Watson Hughes, and then there is Carter's building
On the opposite side of the street.
on the opposite side of the street.
Nissan, Carter's,
Yep.
and who's in here?
Watson Hughes are at the rear.
What do they do?
They're construction. I believe it's a lease yard.
There's also the bakery below.
Coupons are at the other
On
end.
the other side, yeah, correct. Yep.
Also right on the edge.
Do we take questions here, or we're just gonna?
Snell's
Thanks, Ralph.
Packaging is next door to us on the north side.
So, Paul, the expectation now was there'd be availability for questions from councillors of this gentleman. Yep.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you very much for your submission or your commentary. I think what you're concerned about the impact on your property rights, and that's the big word, but you know, your ability to use your property and prosper from it as a consequence of reverse sensitivities kind of thing. Now so you're talking about if you happen to make a lot of noise, which you can't help but do. The neighbour, at the moment, there's a whole lot of industrial guys or car parks. There's going to be families there. They'll hate that. There's a lot of traffic that'll occur. Little kids run over. They'll hate that. So it's a resource. So you're concerned that the people will then start saying, "Hey, it's hell of a noisy. Shut down the business," kind of thing, or you have to work instead of working 24 hours a day. You'll have to work 8 hours a day. Are those your concerns?
Yes, and the impact this is going to have on, as you point out, on property values and in the area, just as to the logical sense of putting a residential operation right close to an industrial operation doesn't seem to make a lot of sense in a busy street.
Okay.
Already busy.
I think you've covered it well. If I could just say that we don't want any impact on our current ability to be able to perform business as usual. And also the other concern is around the congestion that I think we all know when we drive out to the base on Saturdays, there's already an extreme traffic congestion problem already. What's going to be the effect of, and this is not affecting our business, this is just a general comment, I guess, what's going to be the effect of the extra umpteen traffic movements a day around the base on Saturday? So,
and this is a kind of going to a perfect world. If they could exist there and you could exist there, you'd be happily, you'd be all right. Am I right? It's not you don't want them there per se. You don't want them to come there and then suddenly realise that, geez, we're in a dangerous area. Complain to council. Council closes you guys down eventually because you're too noisy, too much blah blah blah.
Yes, I would say yes to that. Accepting one thing is we have a bit of a fear as to what this could look like in 10 years' time. I mean, let's put it out there. If it goes slum,
Yep.
how's that going to impact on our property values?
Okay.
Might be hard to quantify, but that's just as an owner, that's a bit of a fear.
What confidence do you have that council is capable of going through this process and with discussion with you and other neighbours, mitigating some of these things? And maybe we can't mitigate things, but thus far, have you had some confidence in the process?
Well, as I pointed out, we did make the submission through Louise Feathers.
Yes.
And we've had no communication from council. We only got advice late Friday afternoon of this council meeting.
Today.
So the degree of communication hasn't been there to date. May not be required to be there, but we just want to be assured that if it does proceed, our concerns are listened to and worked through.
I think we like to say we're fair and reasonable people, and would love to work with council to mitigate those things, see the process through properly. We'd just like to be involved. That's, I guess, why we're here today, to put up our hand and say, here we are, we've got concerns.
Well, that's really, and it's really glad you've done that.
And we're not, we'd just like to point out too that we're not here as being against porters. That's not the point.
Yep.
We've just got these genuine concerns.
We're too small. We're too small to be against portals.
Thank you.
Thanks for your presentation this morning. When you say you're a manufacturer, have you got full manufacturing plant there that is noisy, or are you more assembling items that are flat packed?
We do have machinery that's noisy, not particularly in excess of any other manufacturer. But I guess if we decided to do a 24/7 shift at midnight, it could be noisy.
Okay, that of course is my second question. Do you currently, or have you, do you envisage that the business will operate outside, I call it 9 to 5 or 8 to 4 or whatever normal working hours?
Sure, yeah. We currently do some late shifts. We don't go 24/7. We do some late shifts to perhaps 9 p.m. in the busy season. However, we don't want to restrict. I mean, we're a growing business and we've got certain machinery capacity, so it could be an option in the future to run 2 shifts.
Okay, and do the machines on their own, do they create such a level of noise that, you know, that your staff are required to put on earmuffs and all those sorts of things?
Yes, correct.
To mitigate, as far as they're concerned,
yes, correct.
That noise area.
Yeah.
Have you had any complaints in the past about noise from, because there are residents, there is a residential area, I guess, well, there is it's on the other side, isn't it? So you have not had any complaints from the residential area in terms of noise in the past?
No.
No, okay.
No, I mean, as far as manufacturers go, as I pointed out, I don't think we're out of the ordinary. From an outside point of view, you have your timber saws going with your big sucking machines tend to generate a bit of noise. During the day, you'd hardly distinguish us from any other place. But as I say, in the middle of the night, that could be a different story if there was a residential housing next door.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Dave.
Right through that area, Puketi through to St Andrews, between the existing industrial users and the existing residentials, there's a 20-metre buffer strip shown on the plan. You can see it actually on the bottom right side of it sort of stops there. If there was that sort of gap between the development and your 20 metres of planting and greenery with nothing allowed between your property and any housing. In other words, when you look at I'm looking at one of the diagrams here. If the housing was shifted in further, would that assist? Is that something you'd think would help mitigate the problems? Because at the moment, there's no buffer strip between shown in this between the residential and your place and Couplands to the south.
It would certainly mitigate, I guess, noise issues. It's going to help. It's not going to necessarily answer the traffic congestion problems or the impact on values and the other things that we've raised. But certainly, I think that would have to be a prerequisite. I'd think to have that buffer zone
between that area and the Ashurst Park next door. I'm not sure whether you or the staff have raised it. There's a dirty great ditch at the moment and some old fences and all sorts of stuff which I see on a weekly basis. If they were open out to the parkland, would that sort of help in terms of the amenity of the area? If they were sort of connected with Ashurst Park and the sports drome next door and things like that, not in a driving sense, in an access sense. And that's sort of basically the park above it, so they can see the top 2 sections there, sort of going down.
What issue were you thinking that would solve?
Well, there's no connection at the moment, which is certainly mentioned in the staff report.
Right.
There's no physical connection.
Yeah.
Other than they happen to border each other. I mean, you don't have to have an opinion. I just wondered whether you did.
Haven't really got an opinion on that. Haven't thought through that one. But yeah, if the housing development was to go ahead, I guess it would be maybe logical for that to happen.
And Eagle Way, which would come through from in front of your place through to Couplands, would that not become an alternative route for the traffic coming out of this SHA? And if they're going somewhere, they might go straight down to Wairere Drive, for instance, along the rest of Eagle Way, rather than trying to go out onto Te Rapa Road?
I guess it's going to go both ways, isn't it? Our feeling was once it's opened up as a through road, it will become a lot busier. A lot of people will use that as an alternative route. People coming down Maui Street, for instance, instead of going out into Te Rapa Road to head south, they could go straight through. So the road's going to become a lot busier.
Except you can only turn left at the bottom of Eagle Way, can't you? Going onto Wairere Drive, you can't turn right back up to the base or anything.
Yes, yeah. Correct. No, that's true. We're certainly not opposed. The road going through is a brilliant idea. Well, I think we've been waiting for that for a long time.
That's good. It's been on the map for 20 years.
Yeah. It's just how this piece of land is used at the back, and I guess again we just wanted to raise those concerns so that they are addressed in the process.
Yep. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate your presentation.
If we can, we'd be glad to work with the council in relation to these concerns and work with the parties involved. They are genuine concerns.
Yep. I think we thank you for coming today and raising these with us. But potentially may stop bigger problems later on for us as a city. And so, yeah.
That would be our concern.
Mm.
Very good. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Thank you for your help.
Okay. Thank you.
So next up, just in support of the application, the applicants, Mr. Holbrook and Mr. Wood, their 10-minute speaking slot.
Okay, so just to be fair to both parties, and that we've been equal to both parties, it's 10 minutes to speak and then up to 10 minutes for questions. But at 10 minutes into questions, we'll have to stop you because we need to be fair and equal to both parties. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Chief Executive, councillors, staff, submitters and members of the public. My name is Andrew Wood and here representing Porter Developments today in relation to this SHA. Porter Developments Limited has applied through an expression of interest to Hamilton City Council to have a special housing area established over a 6.45 hectare site located adjacent to Eagle Way and links with Maui Street in Te Rapa. The site is currently zoned industrial under the Operative District Plan, with a portion covered by the amenity protection area adjacent to existing residential zone land to the northeast. In addition, the site does have existing land use consents in place for various commercial activities, which include large format retail, office, drive-through and commercial services for the entire site. The site is also afforded slightly different enabling activities in the Operative District Plan through the establishment of managed care facilities, retirement villages and rest homes. Directly to the northeast is an existing recreation reserve of Ashurst Park, including the council-owned Te Rapa Sports Drome building, which houses the neighbourhood house and associated community and sporting uses. Adjacent to the reserve and the amenity protection area to the northeast is existing residential development within the cul-de-sac of Sequoia Place. The nature of the SHA submitted by PDL has not changed since it was first submitted to council. PDL estimates a dwelling yield of approximately 186 residential units with with indicative housing typologies including duplex dwellings, terraced housing and apartments. The council recommendation is for a minimum of 150 units to be delivered as part of the SHA, based on further stormwater investigations to be undertaken as part of the qualifying development phase. The SHA proposes a mixture of 2, 3 and 4 bedroom dwellings with section sizes ranging from 150 to 350 square metres. Plans for the SHA will be further refined as part of the qualifying development phase, which can commence once the site is gazetted by the Minister. Acknowledging that the purpose of an SHA is to increase housing supply and improve housing affordability, PDL believe they can deliver 2 and 3 bedroom dwellings, a significant portion of those dwellings for under $600,000. These sale prices are able to be achieved due to an average land value considerably less than sections currently available in greenfield locations around Hamilton. PDL are committed to bringing houses to the market as quickly as possible. As soon as the site has been confirmed as an SHA, work will commence on the qualifying development application and private developer agreement. Clause 14 of the Hamilton Special Housing Area Policy requires all proposals for an SHA to demonstrate to the satisfaction of council that the development achieves the purpose of HASHA in a manner consistent with the Accord, the development places no additional financial burden on the council, and all infrastructure is available or be made available at no cost to council. Clause 15 provides 7 criteria that the council can evaluate to determine whether Clause 14 has been met. The council report provides a comprehensive assessment against the criteria and concludes that there is a high level of consistency and alignment between the PDL proposal and council's policy. PDL are in agreement with the assessment. Regarding the statement of intent, PDL have recently been in discussions with council staff about the content of a statement of intent. The SOI is a high-level legally binding agreement between PDL and council which covers the infrastructure requirements for the proposed development. Funding for that infrastructure and a commitment from PDL to deliver 40% of all housing units in the development as affordable. The intent of the SOI is accepted by PDL, in particular the obligation to deliver affordable houses and understand Hamilton City Council requirements to ensure that the development places no additional financial burden on council. The main outstanding matters that require further dialogue before the SOI can be finalised relate to the financial burden of funding infrastructure upsizing, such as infrastructure that council could require above and beyond what is needed to service the development. In this respect, the draft SOI states that council may not fully or even partially pay for upsizing of infrastructure. PDL require acceptance that the benefits from upsizing infrastructure to meet council's strategic outcomes or accommodate growth unrelated to the proposed development will be recognised by council, and that it's unfair to burden those costs on PDL. In confirmation, a clarification of the government's criteria for Kiwi-built home buyers, PDL was originally advised by council in December 2017 that the term affordable would apply to houses under $600,000 for regions outside of Auckland. The government's Kiwi-built website now suggests that cap will be $500,000. PDL has the resource and are motivated to progress quickly with the SHA at Eagle Way. Once the gazetting process is complete, PDL will commence with detailed design and get underway with preparing information and reports to support the qualifying development application. PDL support the recommendations outlined in the council report to delegate authority to the Chief Executive to finalise and sign a statement of intent, to negotiate and sign a private developer agreement, to confirm the proposal meets the criteria in Section 16 of the Housing Accords and Special Housing Areas Act, and to make a recommendation to the Minister for Housing and Urban Development to gazette the site as an SHA. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions.
Before we go to questions, can I just ask the Chief Executive to clarify an area?
So the Mayor was asking me whether or not we needed to put into the SOI in relation to any of the noise considerations that were raised in the previous conversation, but Paul has informed me that will be picked up as part of the application for a qualifying development in terms of the resource consents and the impact on neighbours and directly impacted as well. So for councillors, it will be a consideration that's picked up later on down the track.
I think from the applicant's perspective as well, there'd be no concerns with reverse sensitivity clauses, no complaints covenants, as would be commonplace with any such concern.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. And my point is almost exactly what we just discussed then. Andrew, thank you for your presentation. And it sounds like you're meeting all the, it's affordable housing, you're paying for the infrastructure with a bit of an argument over the upsizing, which will be a debate to be had, all that sort of stuff. But what concerns me is, you heard the previous people, they've got a business there, they've got an absolute right to be 24 hours if they want to. I don't know if they are 24 hours now, but that is possibly part of one of the things they could do. and it will affect the value of their business, the value of their property. And you started talking about it just then, covenants and things like that. How can, and I'm not saying you have to do this, it's a kind of a justice thing, I guess I'm thinking about. How can you mitigate things like that? Can you put covenants on your property and say, look, be aware that at 3 a.m. in the morning, the blokes next door might start up their saws or something like that?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, and based on some of the concerns raised, that's something we'd be having that discussion with porters around, would be implementing those through the qualifying development stage. In terms of no complaints covenants would be the norm, but any other mechanisms could be explored.
And you may not be the right person to answer this one, but how do we, and you just started talking about it then, Richard, how do we really lock that into the agreement so that, when, I've forgot the name, and when the Reveille people in, when 50 years time from now, when you're ready to pack up and you want to sell it, you still want to sell a property that's got the rights to work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day.
Yeah, so ultimately they can be dragged through to the resource consent, even put on titles as well. There's covenants on titles, so they can be effectively permanently placed as a constraint or restraint on those properties.
Because we all want housing, we want cheaper housing, we want more of it, but we don't want to blow away the guys who've got property rights and are providing jobs and things like that. Yeah, yep. Do you agree? Thank you.
Councillor Martin, I'm going to limit your questions because we are on a time constraint here, so I'm limiting each member's questions to 2 minutes. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
2 quick questions, and I just want to pick up on Councillor Mallett's point. So in this housing deal, it's okay for people to be kept awake at 3 in the morning, whereas the rest of the city can have entitlement to sleep.
Can I answer that question? Yep. Yeah, good question, Councillor Gallagher. Look, the district plan has got provisions in it relating to noise, and that it affords some higher thresholds for the industrial zone, and the acknowledgement that they generally are the places where noisier activities occur. And usually those noise standards apply to residential land and the noise effects on that residential land. So the district plan already sort of contemplates this issue in terms of industrial activities occurring next to residential. So we'll be looking very closely at those district plan provisions and see how this works in other parts of the city in terms of that interaction.
Design of insulation, double glazing, proper, within the house, because obviously the house is on main roads and that.
Sure.
You're looking at that?
Absolutely, yep. And I think the other point that the submitter's made in terms of a buffer is a very good one. I think that's something that we can look at in terms of those interfaces between the site and those industrial areas.
Sure. Secondly, can you just explain how this development relates to the Ashurst Park and the green space? I think it does, but just take me through that if you would.
Yeah, to summarise, there's two key connection points for both pedestrian and social reserve access to link with Ashurst Park. So direct access from the new collector road is provided through to Ashurst Park, as well as the indicative location of a stormwater facility would also be adjacent to the park as well.
Could we have the map up? Because to be honest, I just want to, not quite sure. I'm happy to hold that over for staff to explain to us if need be. I don't want to take your time, but.
Was it page 181 in our agenda?
Yeah, but with respect the.
Okay, we'll come back to you, Deputy Mayor Paula. Councillor Paula. Once we've got it all lined up, we'll jump back.
Not very good graphics.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a quick question. I was going to ask about the buffering and your willingness to look at good practice around reverse sensitivity buffering. I think you answered that. So the other question I want to ask is more to do with, as you will have noted in the report, the commentary around availability of industrial land within Hamilton and the shortage thereof.
Yep.
Now, you've obviously made the decision to go out of using that as industrial land into housing. Can I explore that a bit more? Is there no good commercial opportunity for you to sell your land into commercial or industrial uses?
Yep.
And and therefore get it, make profit in that way?
Sure.
And where would we find, oh, well, I'm going to ask staff later where we might mitigate the loss of industrial land somewhere else.
Yeah, so I guess this site is a little bit unique in that the district plan already treats it differently from other industrial land. So it's got an overlay or a special provision that relates to it, and that allows for a variety of non-industrial activities to already establish on that site. And as Mr. Wood said, rest homes, retirement villages are already anticipated in the district plan on this particular site. So I guess it is a little bit unique in that respect. And the other point is that there is actually resource consent or land use consents already being granted for a number of uses on that site that are of a commercial nature and not a industrial nature.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor James, can we just pop back to just wind up on your last explanation? So I don't want to go back into questions, but just answer the Deputy Mayor's question, which was the through fare.
There's two access points shown on page 182 of in terms of the maps and the indicative development layouts. There are two pedestrian and connectivity points with HS Park.
Can you point that? I mean, it's just the problem. It's not a particularly good graphic, in my respectfully.
Oh, sorry. Well, that's the.
Yeah, that's the one. I'm just looking at the. I'm looking at where the houses are, and I'm living in one of those houses, and I just want to.
Yeah, one's exactly where the
right
CE's finger is there, and one's about halfway along that right-hand boundary.
Right, so you go in between the houses out. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor James.
Thank you, Andrew. So one of my questions has been partly answered. The housing plan here obviously is not set in concrete yet, and you're willing to work with the Riverlea Group and Council to have that buffer. That's good. The other question I had was taking into account that this is the land that's going to be developed, or looking at being developed as industrial land. Are there any envisaged problems with the land? Because being industrial, one of the concerns would be if there'd been diesel leakage or chemical leakage on that land, and any health problems it could cause future residents of that area.
Yeah, certainly acknowledged, particularly with the historic uses on that site as well, and there'll need to be full soil contamination work done prior to any soil disturbance activities as part of the qualifying development stage. That'll need to be quantified and understood what the remediation requirements are.
I believe that's reflected in the draft statement of intent as well. So it's acknowledged in there that the parties need to do that.
Cheers. Thank you.
Councillor Dave.
Just a little bit further on the buffer strip, which I asked the others about before. Can you tell me why you didn't there's a buffer strip between industrial and residential right through the area pretty much from Beers Court northwards, 20 metre wide. Did you not think that would be necessary between the residential area you're talking, the SHA, and the industrial areas on the north and south?
Yeah, I guess that's controlled in the district plan at the moment, and that amenity protection area exists. You're right. That predominantly relates to sort of bulk and location standards, which are reduced in that corridor. There is a buffer indicatively shown. It's not quantified, and that is something that I guess we'll pick up with the submitters moving forward.
Yeah, we just thought it might have been better to preempt that. The connections with the HS Park and the Te Rapa Sportsdrome there, would you be building them yourself? Because there's no such connections. In fact, there is a dirty great ditch and a forest in a small corner there in the way at the moment.
Yeah, that's reflected in the SOI that the full connection points will need to be funded by the developer.
Okay. Thanks.
Councillor Leo.
What is the proposal of Porter's for that area of land which is facing Te Rapa Road? Currently there's a fruit shop there and a garage plus a Porter's old office building.
That's a good question, one I probably can't answer here.
So you've got no idea what's going to happen to it?
I believe there is some work going underway at the moment on that particular site. We're not involved in it, so I'm afraid we don't have the detail. I'm not sure if council staff have received anything application-wise for that site.
We haven't received any formal application or the Tarapa Road frontage yet. It does have an existing commercial consent in place at this time.
Councillor Siggy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just looking at the public feedback and the comments and by Peter H. Boss, and I was just thinking, I mean, will you be, is that important to you to put in cycling and walking tracks because it is so close, like to the base, to so many other places where people could go, and also for the mobility impaired. So will they be strong there?
Yeah, the pedestrian linkages are indicative at this point, and they're certainly supported by porters to provide those links both to the north, east, and to the south, to the roading infrastructure that will form part of this.
Because there's so many, the areas or the places are so small, the apartments and whatever, so people need to get to the parks and they need to get out there. So that's really important. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was very good timing. We've just finished our 10 minutes, so thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
So, yeah, any questions of members? Councillor Angela.
Thank you, Andrew. One question. Because this is a fast-tracked process under the Act, what are the rights of those people that will be affected? Because it's different. We're not technically operating under in an RMA environment. So are they lessened?
Very good question. And picking up on Mr. Dunn's presentation earlier. So just to be very clear, a lot of these issues around siting design, sound attenuation would be picked up at the consent stage. So we're not ignoring that. We're looking at as much as we can now so we can give some certainty to the Minister when they gazette the site. But they still have to put in a formal resource consent under the process. The difference under HASHA and the RMA is the notification rights are slightly different. So you don't automatically fully notify. There's only limited notification rights. Mr. Dunn's property would be picked up under that, so he would be deemed an affected party. So planners, when the application comes in, they would be notified. And those issues that have just come up around noise and bulk and siting and location, that's when that discussion would happen, so that wouldn't be ignored. But in terms of some of the other issues in terms of wider notification, it's more of a tighter lens, but because it's immediately adjoining this site, then the submitters would be picked up at that stage.
And then any determinations made around mitigation will be made by the panel of three, won't they? And
sorry, the panel of...
Yeah, there's a panel?
Oh, yeah, if it's necessary to go to a hearing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it would be much like a normal resource consent, but there's a weighting under the HASHA, so the priority is to deliver housing. But that certainly doesn't rule out all of the issues that have just been raised. So it may be that when it gets through the Minister, and if the Minister accepts the site, as you see there on the screen before you, what with all the other restrictions around affordability and what that might look like, then the submitters are well within their rights to change the layout slightly, and that's when those discussions would happen. But there's, buffering and sound attenuation, looking at the orientation of future housing on that site, that's all for the QD stage. So that comes up in that discussion.
And while urban design isn't a must-have, it's something that under the HASHA Act can be sort of given regard to.
Yep.
Do we still have our urban design panel? Like, where does that lens come in? Is that up to the planners? Or?
We do have an urban design panel. It comes under sort of the GM role of the growth and planning team. The urban design panel is a voluntary process, so if the submitter wishes to go that route, they can, and they get free advice in terms of who's on that panel, in terms of layout design, where you might put some of the more sort of higher density parts of the scheme on that site. What we've tried to do at the the SOI stage is to provide some of those high-level certainties. So we've actually put into the SOI, certainly the draft SOI, and as Mr. Wooden-Holbrook has said, that requirement to ensure a far better interface with Ashurst Park and connections. That's good urban design to provide those pedestrian linkages to that northeast corner. So we certainly wouldn't want to see high-density development turning its back on Ashurst Park and putting up 6-foot fences. And so to provide those linkages, there's a hook there in the SOI, which gives us that discussion when it comes into QD.
Thanks, Paul.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. And it's following on from what Angela said. So what protection have, because the RMA has a level of requirement and that sort of stuff, you talked about notification. Yep. So presumably the previous submitters will have been one of the notified parties,
yes.
Simply because they're adjoining?
Yes, okay. Correct.
And so what protection is that they've had they've I call it existing land use rights or something like that. I don't know if that is a legal term anymore, but they've been there for a while. They've been using they've developed a business there. They're employing a lot of people. Then suddenly a whole lot of Nappy Valleys turn up with kids, and there's a whole lot of noise going on. What protection can be given?
I mean, it's a good question, and we deal with this at the minute with other infill sites in the city, not necessarily industrial land, but in residential, where we're trying to, like duplex developments, there's been other sites in the city recently where exactly that, you're introducing a higher density environment compared to what's around it. I mean, the resource consent process would look at those effects, that reverse sensitivity issue. So certainly not for the Gazette stage. The Gazette stage is all about trying to get things to the Minister, but in terms of looking at the detail around intensification... Which is
kind of a second stage or a further stage.
So then they're certainly not ignored. The planners would have to look at that, like the bulk and the siting. The applicants did raise this site has got existing baseline consents that are in place. They could enact at any moment. And that's for quite some substantial commercial office retail operation and all the traffic that would go with that. So
because there's traffic, not just noise.
Yeah, so the planners would weigh up what that site currently could do today, and they'd look at the proposal before them for residential. But yeah, it's a notable point that this already has a high level of commercial consent, and obviously those buildings, being industrial buildings, could be 10 metres plus in height. So you look at what you could do under the baselet zoning, which is industrial, and then what they're proposing to do now as the residential.
There is a brighter side, I suppose, to the extent that the existing business there is quite noisy. You'll have no problem with being reasonably cheap property next door, is that right?
I wouldn't necessarily say that.
I'm taking the mickey, don't worry. Thank you.
Councillor Robb.
Thank you. First question is about the 11-metre height restriction. Is that likely, as I recall, the land is elevated at the back, and particularly where the Rivoli business is, the land starts to become elevated? Does the 11-metre restriction, does that apply from the elevation point of the land or the lowest part of the subdivision, which is on flat land?
You're getting into very technical issues there. At which point
I guess it could be important in the sense of a sense of where the building might sit in terms of the height of Rivoli's building and the adjoining residential units.
I'd have to defer to my planning consent colleagues on at which point you measure a building from is at the highest point.
Well, maybe it's something that perhaps needs some consideration.
Absolutely. I mean, just for council's awareness, under that natural ground level. Thank you, Alyssa. So what we deem to be... It's
not the lowest point of this in the subdivision?
Not necessarily the lowest point.
Yeah, so it's either the natural ground level or the lowest point as a result of earthworks. So depending on what they do on the site.
Okay, so if you elevated the land, it's 11 metres from...
It would be the original lowest point of the natural ground level.
Of the whole subdivision, or just the ground level underneath the particular housing unit?
Yes.
Okay, I think I understand. Okay, I guess that does answer my question. I notice on page 185 through to 187, where we detail those in support of the proposal and those opposers. We haven't named the submitters who were supporting the proposal. We've only named the submitters who opposed it. Is there a particular reason for that?
No. I mean, we could find those details. I think in terms of brevity, because it's already a very large report, I think we tried to, just raise the salient points in terms of those in support.
Okay. Were the other 6 submitters who opposed the SHA proposal, were they given the opportunity to present today in the same way that Riverlea were?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of process, so that when the policy was signed last year, we built in that ability for consultation in the policy. When we get to this stage before you today, we summarise those for and against, and then we notify those people who've put in submissions prior to council meeting today and give them an opportunity to come along. So those that we have information on who put in their feedback, we can then contact them.
So they're all given the opportunity to present today. Next question is on the uncertainty of the piece of land that is right at the front of the subdivision, the bit that overlooks the base. And given that it's got multi-use options as far as porters are concerned, that is, it could be used for, as I understand it, industrial, big box retailing, rest home and a whole bunch of other things. Should the SOI mitigate against potential future use of that land, given that that could be to the detriment of the residences that are constructed should the SHA go ahead? I'm thinking of, another manufacturing plant going in the front, which probably wouldn't be given the road frontage and the potential value of that piece of land, given what is already around it. But should we be mitigating and limiting the potential use of that land in the SOI?
It's a very good question. I suppose it's what comes first. In terms of the SOI and the site that the applicants put their red line through, the biro, we can certainly look at the site. In terms of what potentially happens outside the SOI, and this is one of the challenges with SHAs, is because you're looking at housing on industrial land. So if there's still industrial land around it, then whoever owns that land has the right to develop that for industrial purposes. So what you're asking is, can we predict what may or may not happen on that strip fronting Te Rapa? All we know at the moment is there's a lawful consent for them to build a commercial element, offices and retail. I think there's also potential car parking areas. Now, there may be a lodgement between now and the time the Minister gazettes this site that we're looking at today. When a QD comes in, they lodge a resource consent, we would have to look at all the existing consents around. It does help that there's that requirement to do that future road linking Carrera Place and Eagle Way, because that forms a natural buffer between the commercial, and the district plan already requires that whatever development goes on in the SHA site to provide that link road. So that severance with the road for the traffic does provide a natural buffer. That's not to say at the time a QD comes in, we couldn't also look at what we might know is happening on the Te Rapa road frontage, and we could ask for a buffer at that point.
Could I also...
But don't we have an opportunity here, given that the owner of the potential development and the owner of the front section are one of the same?
That's also, I think, the point I was going to raise is there's a natural market tension that's occurring here, Councillor Pascoe. So any limitations you place on the front section will have a detrimental impact potentially on the ability to sell that land. Likewise, if you don't put an impediment on that land, the price of the housing may well be affected by what can be built there as well. So I think the best thing is for the developer, in this case, to balance their needs. And I suggest if we put a requirement like that in the SOI, it would provide us driving that market pressure, whereas they're trying to achieve certain outcomes given the whole site. So I'll be reluctant to enter into that sort of discussion with porters. If council wishes me to, we can, but I think the natural tension of having the same owner owning both the, it's almost the tongue-in-cheek comment that Councillor Mallett talked about in terms of the affordability of those houses. If they let a huge manufacturing plant go up front of those houses, it's going to be a lot lower value for those properties. And likewise, if they have something that's more of a commercial, quiet, retail car parking type scenario, they'll probably get the maximum return out of that site. So there's that commercial pressure in my mind.
Okay, so that's something that will be considered in terms of the SOI?
I guarantee it'll be a discussion that's raised. The extent to which we lock it into the SOI will be depending on where porters sit on their views or how they want to manage their returns.
Okay, and then the only two remaining questions are ones that I've already asked in regard to the last SHAR, and that is whether or not we have made provision for any infrastructure costs that council has to bear, that we have those already in the draft long-term plan. And the second question was around, I've forgotten what the second question was now. The second question was around the quality of the appearance of the builds, not to create the potential for a slum area, given the pressure that the developer will be under to do the 40% affordable housing within the development.
Yes, and so I mean that is going to be a pressure, and like I said, the layout of this site before you is, in my view, very likely to change once the affordability component comes in, and they now have to provide 40% a 500,000 price point. That might change the typology. I suspect it would go to a smaller two-bed type typology to do that. But certainly the design considerations are still relevant at QD stage. They're not of paramount consideration because the Act sets it up to put the weight towards delivery of housing, but they're not ruled out. So certainly high density development shouldn't mean poor quality design. Obviously it depends on the developer at the end of the day when the spade's put in the ground and how you monitor that through building control. But certainly in terms of the QD stage, all those issues around layout, connections, buffering and design and elevation treatment would be looked at that stage.
Thank you.
Councillor Mark.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. My question is around the traffic flow. What work has been done? Like, what do you think the implications are going to be of traffic around the base area and Wairere Drive, given that not only are you bringing in a whole new set of drivers and cars and cyclists, etc., but you're also opening up that thoroughfare between Maui Street and Wairere Drive, which will become, I would anticipate, a major thoroughfare. So what work's been done on predicting that?
Sure. So at this stage, as with most SHAs, we're in that precarious position where we want to recommend to the Minister with a level of certainty, and then you do a more deep dive at QD stage in terms of what we call a ITA, an integrated traffic assessment. So there's been an initial traffic assessment done, and our infrastructure team are comfortable that we've got sufficient confidence that workable solutions on intersection upgrades or the intensification that might result from 150 dwellings on that unit can be mitigated at QD stage, much like a normal resource consent. So there's been no red flags at this stage. I suppose the dilemma with all of these SHAs is we've got to weigh up how detailed we get, and that takes time, requiring more assessment. So what we're trying to do through these SOIs is lock in what we need to know to give us sufficient confidence that infrastructure can be or is likely to be provided to the Minister. So, if we were seeing, red smoke at this stage saying this site can't take 150 dwellings from a vehicle movements per day, then certainly that would be reported. But
So do we even have a red smoke detector though? I mean, it's a congested area already.
Yeah.
And I agree with the need for housing, etc. But boy, oh boy, it's not you're doing two things with this development, aren't we? We're opening up a racetrack and we're also putting houses next to it.
I mean, there's a way you can mitigate that. I mean, I'm not a traffic engineer, but there's signalisation, there's design of the road.
Yeah.
I suppose what we've got to bear in mind as well is that site already enjoys quite a high intensity use, given the level of retail and commercial that are on that site.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have big lorries and low loaders coming in and out of that site already. So there's a base traffic vehicle movements per day that we need to take into account.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
Yeah, well, just to add to that, we still haven't negotiated the infrastructure solution for that road through there anyway.
Right.
So that's still part of the work in progress, what that's ultimately going to look like. So that goes to the next phase.
Right, so you could potentially make it throaty and lumpy and quite hard to get through.
Yeah, we're thinking about it. We're thinking about a toll road.
Probably made a bit of money out of it.
Okay, so the motions on the board. Or coming. And
yeah, sorry, Mayor. Could I just highlight building on the changes that were made to the previous item at Rizikari? We're just making a few changes in terms of bringing back that second stage, that private developer agreement will come back to council, so that's the bit highlighted in yellow. And then the other alteration we've just made is, and this is picking up on Mr. Wood and Mr. Holbrook's points earlier about what do we mean by this 40% affordable, what might that look like to give the applicant some certainty. We're just saying when we say 40%, that's as defined out in those sections of the report before you, and that goes back to the Kiwi Build criteria.
Can you slide that back up again? So does that mean we'll get a copy of the PDA to consider?
You will sign off. You will sign off the PDA.
A copy of a completed PDA, not a template.
No, you will get to sign off at the end of today. If you approve all the SHAs, you'll get 3 independent PDAs to review and endorse.
At a council meeting?
At a council meeting.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
Could I ask through you to the Chief Executive whether the issues that have been raised by councillors about this, like buffering and what's on the front block in front of it, and that, how do we know for sure that they're going to get addressed in this? Because the motion itself doesn't say that.
So the team, quite a few members of the team have been sitting there taking notes. I'm hoping, but I have as well.
Yeah.
And I hear the concerns of council, and the Mayor just asked me that same question as well offline. So I think a big chunk of this process as well at the qualifying development stage is all those considerations need to be, regardless, we hear your views, but they all need to be considered from a legal perspective anyway, going through. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if I could just pick up on that, and like you say, we're trying to build in as much certainty at the SOI stage. The likelihood is all of this is picked up anyway at QD stage, and you need that PDA as well. So, you know, the layout might change. So where we lock in...
It's just when you say the likelihood, and you expect and things like that.
Well, I'll clarify, it will be.
There is certainty. There is certainty the QD stage requires this.
Yeah. I suppose the issue we have at this stage before you today is the layout might change, so we can't tie down exactly where a buffer might be until we know how many units they're going to put on the site.
But the question of buffers, for instance, will be...
Yeah, we could certainly add that into the SOI that we want.
Questions of the effects and then the questions of the mitigations will be discussed as part of the qualifying development stage.
Yeah. It might be a wall 7 metres high.
So, Mr Dunn, we just want to make that really clear to you that we've sent a clear message through to staff. They've taken it on board, and should this go through today, they will address that and certainly be looking at that whole area of noise mitigation.
And also the applicant, through their agents, have also heard the conversation today as well, and I'm sure they'll be taking these points back to the developer in question.
Thank you. Okay, so we're now in debate. There is no debate yet. There is Councillor Paula, sorry.
That's fine. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I will allow this.
Sorry, I'll move that and seconded by Councillor James.
Given the safety net we have of being able to sign off the PDAs and assurances that this goes through a process and that the concerns of the neighbours will be, well, I mean, it's in everyone's best interest to work those through together, along with the ones that we haven't heard from today, which you would normally hear from in a hearing situation where you have the fors and against a panel. I I do have some concerns about this development at this stage, and I am hoping this next part will give me some comfort around some of those, because I don't think, even though we do need houses, we don't need lots and lots of houses at any cost. We must achieve a quality outcome, and we must achieve a community, as I said with the previous application. I don't just want to see houses, I want to see communities developed and built that work for everybody concerned. Looking back, we've made errors in the past. I think some of the high density living in Frankton is not where we want to be going with this. We want to be doing much better in providing green space, access to passenger transport, connections with cycleways, and all those kind of things which make it a quality lifestyle for people, not just a roof over their head. So I'm really hoping, I'm saying that out loud because I'm hoping that the developers and all of those interested parties in this will go beyond just considering a buffer and take it back to the drawing board and say, how do we address all of these concerns as we go forward? So it's something we can all be proud of when it lands. Because as I say, I, coming from regional council, have seen the negative effects of reverse sensitivity more times than I can count, where an existing business has been in place and lifestyle houses even have been allowed to develop around them, and that business within 3 years has had to close for things like odour and things that were natural to their business. So I do want some assurances through you, Mr Mayor, that through the next process that we get some good outcomes from this, not just rushed houses. Thank you.
Councillor Dove.
Yeah, look, the purpose of the Special Housing Areas Act, my understanding, was to enable developments of residential properties in industrial and commercial areas. That was principally why it's there. So it's not the right place to say that that's a problem here. Our job is to see if we can make sure that the residences that go in there and the commercial premises that are already in the vicinity can coexist. Not to say, and we shouldn't be saying, like I was hearing in some questions earlier, that we shouldn't be raising concerns about that. We should have raised them when that Act was going through, or when we were signing up to our part of the Act a while ago. So that's the first thing. I think there are some lessons in this, though, for how the council has handled the application or the initial stuff that's come in from the developers. We ought to be talking, our staff and councillors for that matter, with the prospective developers about the designs, some of the elements like the buffer, like noise mitigation, like odour mitigation before it comes here, so that when we get these, some of those questions are answered, or at least there's evidence of the direction that the developers are thinking of. I mean, we teased a lot of that out, but it would be better to be actually up front when it comes to us. Just in terms of traffic in that area, and I use that area a lot because it backs onto the Te Rapa Sportsdrome, it's not that congested in that area really compared to a lot of other parts of the city, except on Saturday mornings and wet Saturday afternoons and Sundays when everyone goes to the base for their entertainment, by the look of things. Seriously, during the day it's a lot less congested than some of the other routes into the city, fortunately. As far as traffic via Eagle Way or the Eagle Way extension goes, that can easily be mitigated so it's not a thoroughfare for trucks. I don't actually think we should be creating something like that alongside a residential area. The trucks at the moment through the signal system have to go out Church Road onto Te Rapa Road. We should keep it that way when they're coming out of Moe Drive, not taking a shortcut through a semi-residential area. The last thing, though, is we've got a whole stack of houses in this area with only 20 metres between that and all sorts of industrial activities for about 6 kilometres stretch north and south of that, and it's only 20 kilometres maximum, sometimes less than that, between the back of a house, 20 metres, sorry, not kilometres, thank you, between the back of the house and the back of a factory. So I don't think we should be all that worried about extending that sort of link as long as there's appropriate buffers.
Thank you, Councillor Dave. Councillor Mark.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. Look, I'll be really quick. I'm supporting it and looking forward to seeing the work that is done around traffic management. Noting that it has been brought up by Larkin Land Limited, Brian Hanna, the Base, and Peter Boss as a very real concern. And it will be an exciting exercise to go ahead with, but I just do want to put a really strong word in for traffic flows because that could be bigger than we think. That was 2 words.
And I have seen a long journey here for Porter Group. This piece of land here was proposed to be zoned one thing in the past, and then that zoning was removed by council, and another far lower use type zoning was put in, and Porter Group had to cover themselves by getting a whole lot of consents on the site to protect their interests, and it's been a long and dizzy process, which I've never been comfortable with, which I've been following now for 4 years. And it's nice to see today that at least there is a proposed use that may go some ways towards putting right what I believe has been a wrong in the past. So I'm pleased that at least something's advancing on the site that Porters are putting forward, and obviously a direction they want to go in. So we'll go to the vote on this. All those for, any against? Carried unanimously. Okay, we'll stop for lunch and we'll come back at 10 to 2. Thank you, all those who presented on that. Thanks, Paul.